All right, thank you. Big welcome. My name is Mike Phillips. I'm Director of Aquaculture and Fisheries Science and the CGR research program on fish agri-food systems. And my job today is to moderate this Fish for Thought event on fish-friendly irrigation, which is hosted by WorldFish, our CGR partners, IWMI and FAO. And this event is around the launch of a new set of guidelines, and the guidelines, which were literally put online just a few minutes ago, are available through a link that's just been put into the chat box. And these are our guidelines on fish-friendly irrigation. So I encourage you to go in there, download, and also look at those guidelines. Big welcome. Before we start, and while we're waiting for others to join, I can see the numbers actually shooting up now. Let's just take a quick note of the instructions and for the organization of this webinar. All attendees are muted by default. We'd love to keep this event as interactive as possible, and they therefore really encourage everyone to submit their questions into the Q&A box. And we have two colleagues there managing the Q&A box, and they will bring questions to the panel during the event. So please feel free to put your questions into the and comments into the relevant box. There's an email there if you're facing any technical problems. You shoot an email off, and we'll try to assist. And the event is also recorded, and the video will be shared after the event. So there'll be the chance to also check in after the event and learn, engage in the conversation. So with that, big welcome again. And I'd like to invite Matthew Mccartney from IWMI to give us some opening remarks and set the scene for today's event. Matthew.
Thank you very much, Mike, and good afternoon, good morning to everybody. Thank you very much for joining this session. Today, through the interaction of two panels, we're going to explore these important new guidelines, which are actually entitled Increasing the Benefits and Sustainability of Irrigation through the Integration of Fisheries, or more simply, as Mike's already alluded to, just fish-friendly irrigation. So this guideline was produced by FAO, WorldFish, and the International Water Management Institute, and is targeted primarily at irrigation engineers, civil engineers, and water resource planners, with the hope that they will better integrate fisheries in future irrigation investments. So why irrigation? Well, within the world of irrigation, there's increasing recognition that irrigation needs to modernize, in part because it's perceived as a good strategy for climate change adaptation. Governments now are planning huge investments, absolutely massive, billions of dollars across Asia and also Africa for new irrigation and also rehabilitation of old irrigation schemes. However, it's recognized that this irrigation must be different to that of the past. Calls for healthier and more sustainable food systems are placing new demands on irrigation, and growing pressures from other water users and increasing environmental awareness mean that irrigation has to perform better. In future, irrigation must not only deliver acceptable returns on investment, but simultaneously it has to improve food security, rural livelihoods, and nutrition, as well as supporting environmental conservation. And as these guidelines show, including fish in irrigation can go a long way to fulfilling those objectives. So why fish? Fisheries are a vital source of food, nutrition, and livelihoods in many places in the world. In many places, fish are the primary source of protein and micronutrients in many people's diets. And typically fish are overlooked in the design, planning and management of irrigation schemes. So very often they're not considered in any way at all. But by blocking fish migration routes and fragmenting fish habitat, irrigation schemes often undermine fisheries. And fisheries effectively pay the price of irrigation development, often without reaping any of the benefits. Of course, this can lead in some instances to conflict between farmers and fishers. And if fisheries are integrated in irrigation schemes, there are many benefits. So research has shown that fish production can be achieved often without undermining crop production, leading to enhanced income, less environmental damage, increased water productivity, and more resilient systems. So what does integration mean? Integrating fisheries into irrigation systems requires technical solutions. And this includes things like provision of habitat within the irrigation schemes and modification of the design and operation of water control infrastructure to enhance connectivity and reduce damage to fish as they migrate. But perhaps more importantly, it also requires sound institutional and governance arrangements that empower local people to manage both their water and their fish resources. So finally, why these guidelines? So these user-friendly guidelines, developed with input from a wide range of experts, describe practical steps on how to integrate fisheries throughout the planning cycle of an irrigation scheme. They provide technical, management and governance options for planning and managing irrigation systems that can prevent negative impacts and enhance fisheries to the benefit of both farmers and fishers. So the ultimate objective, of course, is fish-friendly irrigation that enhances the welfare of both farmers and fishers. And we hope that through these guidelines, the recommendations that they provide will be taken up widely, and integration of fisheries within irrigation will become commonplace throughout Asia and Africa. Thank you very much. Back over to you, Mike.
Thank you, Matthew, for that introduction. We have a short video. Doina, I would ask you to start the video. Thank you. Okay, thank you, Doina. Thanks for the video. You will have missed the sound a little bit at the beginning, I'm sure. But apologies for that. I'm sure in the final version of this webinar, it'll come through perfectly. So thanks for the team for putting that together, and a nice introduction to the webinar from Matthew. Thanks a lot. Whilst I'm listening to that and listening to Matthew, I can see the number of participants has really shot up. So before we start today, we'd like to just find out a little bit more about all of you who've joined us. Big thank you again for joining. I can see 113 participants now in the Fish4Thought. So tell us a little bit more about you. Where are you joining us from today and the organization you work for? So just a few seconds to just click on the poll. I'm sure you all know how to do that. I'm sure everyone's been involved in Zoom calls and so knows how to do that. Just click there on responding to question 1 and 2, and we'll get just a good overview of where you're coming from and the organizations you work for. Shall we see how we're doing, Dinah? Okay. Wow. All right. So over half from Asia and the Pacific region, but some good participation from Africa and Europe. Obviously, the Americas less represented. I think it's probably the middle of the night there, so not perhaps understood. But thank you. We have one participant from North America, and I can't quite see all the organizations we work for, but we've got, I think, quite a good mix across the different type of organizations and stakeholder groups involved in this this area of fish, aquatic foods, and irrigation systems. So really great to see that audience participation. So what I'd like to do now is just to build on that and introduce our panelists. And we're going to organize the Fish4Thought today around two panel sessions. So I'll first introduce the panelists. Great, thanks a lot, Dinah. So we have Sophie Nguyen Kaur, who's a senior advisor for water security at Helvetas. Sophie has more than 20 years of international experience in integrated water resources management and multi-level governance. In Helvetas, she's responsible for water security with emphasis on water stewardship and the interface between water, food, and climate change. Big welcome, Sophie. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Greetings.
Simon van Smith, Senior Fisheries Officer, FAO. Simon is responsible for providing technical advice on inland, coastal, and offshore fisheries, and is actively involved in a number of FAO regional projects in Asia, including multi-sectoral management of the Bay of Bengal, large marine ecosystem. And I know he's been a huge champion of the guidelines and the integration of fish and water management systems. So big welcome and thank you, Simon, for joining today.
Thank you, Mike, and good morning, good afternoon to everybody in the Fish4Thought.
That's great. Then we have John Connellan from the Institute for Land, Water and Society at Charles Sturt University in Australia. John's research work is based on migratory fish within Southeast Asian river basins, where your fish provide your key services in terms of food and nutrition security. his work also focuses on capacity building, working with local stakeholders, researchers in the developing countries where he works. So John, again, welcome. Thanks for taking the time today.
Thanks, Mike, and hello, everyone.
Alvin Lopez, welcome. Senior Natural Resources and Agriculture Specialist from the Asian Development Bank. As part of its responsibilities at ADB, Alvin has been leading quite a wide range of initiatives on environment and natural resources management, including integrating ecosystems, biodiversity, and water resources management considerations into investment in sustainable development. So again, welcome, Alvin. Thanks for taking the time to be with us today.
Hello, everyone. Nice to be here.
Okay, great. And His Excellency Chan Sinath, who's the Undersecretary of the Ministry of Water Resources and Meteorology in Cambodia. Big welcome to you, sir. As part of the efforts to support the ongoing development of water resources and meteorology in Cambodia, His Excellency has recently led the ministry's team in monitoring the capacity building and investments into Cambodian irrigation information systems and irrigation schemes within the country. So really pleased to have you to join us, Your Excellency, today. Thank you also for taking the time.
Thank you much. Welcome to everybody from a province of the northwest areas of Cambodia.
That's fantastic. Thank you for joining. Okay, so again, before going into the panel, just to emphasize, we'd love to make this event as interactive as possible. And therefore, please use the questions box to submit your questions. I think the instructions here are only the questions box. That's the one that's been carefully monitored. And we have two key researchers in the background who I'll also introduce. So firstly, Sonali Senaratna Selamutu, who's the country representative of IWMI in Myanmar, and a postdoctoral fellow from WorldFish, Mark Dubois, also working in Myanmar, but currently in Cambodia. So thank you both for also joining today and helping to manage the questions that come in from the group. Great. So without further ado, let's get started. And I'd like now to talk, to pose some questions to the panel. So firstly, what do you see as the key benefits of integrating fisheries into irrigation systems? And I'd like to pose that question to Simon. Over to you.
Thanks, Mike. If we want to talk about the benefits, first of all, we need to get an idea about the losses or the problems. Irrigation systems and irrigated agriculture has delivered huge benefits to food security across the Asian region, but it has come at a cost. And this cost has been the disruption of ecosystems, aquatic ecosystems, and the loss of fisheries, in some cases even catastrophic losses where water has been severely disrupted and flows and connectivity have been impacted. So this has a knock-on effect to livelihoods and nutrition. So when we talk about benefits, what we're looking at is what can we get back? What can we restore or recover? And this is what's so exciting about integrating fisheries into irrigation systems and making it work better, is to restore and reconnect those systems so that we can recover both the nutrition, the biodiversity, the associated livelihoods and activities that come with that, throughout irrigated systems and croplands. Of course, one thing that is maybe not that well understood or is narrowly seen in irrigation is the understanding of a command area, which is simply the irrigated bit. It's the cropland where the water is delivered to. Very importantly in these guidelines, and a big part of what we're trying to promote now, is the understanding that the extended command area, that's the whole area from the catchment through the reservoir, through the command area, the drainage and delivery systems. This is all part of the irrigation system. And at every point, we can create opportunities to restore and recover connectivity and fishery services. And in doing that, we can pull back some of that fishery productivity that has been lost in those systems. And in other cases, even enhance it above natural levels, particularly with active interventions like stocking within the systems or stocking into the reservoirs. So this is a wide range of interventions that are out there, and of course they're all very case specific, and the thing we're trying to do is open people's eyes to those opportunities and get that conversation going. I think I'll leave it there, Mike, because we've got plenty to get on with.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Simon. Great, that's very helpful answer. And over to you, Sophie. I'd like to ask you a second question, building on Simon's response. So, what are the key, or some of the key barriers to better integrating fisheries into irrigation systems, both from the technical perspective and also from the institutional and policy angle, and how can these best be addressed? Sophie.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Integrating fisheries into irrigation systems first requires a holistic approach, not only across the different activities and sectors, but also across the irrigation system in its extending scope, to understand the distribution of costs and benefits, and to assess them. In other words, who is gaining or losing what, where in the system, and how much. Another barrier is that such integration raises conflicts very often between the different uses of water for farming and fishing, and possibly even between different fishing activities. For example, between capture fisheries and culture-based fisheries. As already mentioned, governance and institutional arrangements may not provide a conducive environment for fish-friendly irrigation, since rules, institutions, and policy often lack coordination and coherence across the related sectors. The last example I provide here in terms of key barrier is that some costs and benefits are difficult to assess in monetary terms, and therefore they do not easily translate into conventional cost-benefit analysis of water control infrastructure. For example, what value has the role of capture fisheries as a safety net for the poor, or as a provider of important nutrients for health, or even in another domain as a contributor of aquatic biodiversity. So how can these various challenges be best addressed? Firstly, by engaging with the key actors in the irrigation system. I mean, this is crucial. And it's not just about consulting the stakeholder representatives, but rather involving them through a process aimed at jointly identifying the issues and finding solutions for a fish-friendly irrigation. And for this purpose, the guide proposes an inclusive step-by-step process to support professionals from understanding the system, identifying the issues and mitigation or management measures, to committing for implementation and monitoring. In practice, the process will be iterative to leave space for learning by doing and for adapting all along the way. So while the guide uses key principles of ecosystem-based approaches, nature-based solution, integrated water resource management to address complex realities, the guidance remains relatively simple and as practical and as operational as possible. And in itself, that was a real challenge. That's it for now. Mike, over to you.
Great, thanks, Sophie. I'd like to just take that theme a little bit more and ask, maybe ask John also to comment here. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit more about some of the technical and institutional challenges from your experience in working in Southeast Asia. So John, could you give us a little bit more detail and build on Sophie's response on some of the challenges of implementation? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mike, and thanks, Sophie. I thought that was a very nice and very thorough answer. And I think building on what Sophie said about institutional needs and the capacity of those institutions to implement and institutionalize the technical components is a really important aspect that can be missed from technical-based projects. So if you don't understand the institution's real needs and their capacity and even their motivations on what they're trying to achieve, then you can spend all the time you want trying to concentrate on how to get more fish to swim into an irrigation area, but without a real understanding and a way forward, a process and a way forward for building the institutional capacity, for building the ownership within those programs, so that when you go to scale out from building one fishway or building a rice fish system, when you go to scale out, that you have the processes in place to be able to do that. And that comes from understanding and then working with the institutions that are charged with that within the country. So, and I guess just to end with that, Mike, the most successful programs that I've worked on in Southeast Asia, but also other countries within fisheries and irrigation, are really those programs that work together closely with building the capacity of the institutions and the governance arrangements, and also developing policy at the same time that they're doing research to fill critical technical knowledge gaps, so that you're not providing the answers for the institutions or the in-country partners, but you're working together to develop and answer those questions that need answering. So I think I'll leave it there, Mike. Is that adequate?
Okay, thanks. So yeah, there's a strong theme there of trying to get institutions to work together. Would you like to say a little bit more about how do you get that to work in practice? And often I see the fisheries department working separately from the water management or irrigation department. How do you make that work in practice? John?
Yeah, so I think an important part, especially within irrigation and fisheries sectors, is obviously they're usually they have different objectives, and they're usually within different departments, and possibly even within different ministries. And I think starting any initiative with both of those groups in the room is an important aspect, instead of just concentrating on the fisheries component and then seeing how that works within irrigation. Our most successful programs have been where we've worked together with irrigation and fisheries, so that they gain an understanding of each other's needs, and that it's very rare that I have found, at least, that irrigation is trying to exclude fisheries from it. Often that it can be done, their mandate is to produce irrigation outcomes and sometimes they're unaware of the fisheries impacts. So building that knowledge through things such as these guidelines, and then putting in place really pragmatic, localized projects involving the institutions and the stakeholders that are needed, and developing that together, I think really brings a common understanding of how you reach food security within these countries.
Thanks, John. Can I appreciate that? I'd like to encourage the audience, if you have any questions, to also put them into the Q&A box there, and I'll use that to probe further with the panel. But I'd like to take up one additional point, which we touched on earlier. It's the often hidden values and hidden social values of fisheries. And perhaps I'll come to Simon. In your experience, how do we bring the hidden values of fisheries and the social values of fisheries to the fore in implementing or integrating fisheries into water infrastructure, water irrigation system? Simon, appreciate
Thanks,
your
Mike.
thought.
Thank you. This is actually probably one of our greatest challenges. One of the reasons is that the impacts of irrigation on fisheries may happen outside of the command area, and therefore are seen as being peripheral or even dissociated from the irrigation activity. In other cases, the loss of riverine fisheries through damming and through diversions will have downstream impacts and sometimes even upstream impacts. So you're looking at this different group, if you like, from the target irrigation farmers group. And so one of our greatest challenges is to recognize externalities of irrigation and this broader range of stakeholders. Quantifying and understanding these impacts has also been quite challenging. The tendency is to see irrigation as a provider of tremendous benefit in the form of increased agricultural productivity. And there's less enthusiasm for the counter narrative of environmental impact and loss of food or food security to other groups. Within that also, I think we need to reflect on the fact that the fishers may also be a rather disadvantaged group. They may not be landowning. They may often be a poorer or different social group to the irrigation farmers who are the target of irrigation, and therefore not seen as being necessarily direct beneficiaries or stakeholders. So getting this institutional understanding and realization that there are these broader impacts and that there are people outside who need to be addressed through these mitigation actions, this can have a very strong effect on understanding those impacts. And I suppose a major reason why a lot of our focus is in Asia is because there is a much less distinction, if you like, between fishers and farmers. There's a lot of blurring between that. And quite often farmers will be fishers as well. And therefore it's much easier to get buy-in and understanding. It's more, let's say, obvious about this. I think we have much more challenges in other regions where there maybe is a greater dissociation between irrigated farmers and fishers.
All right, thanks, Simon, for that, telling us a little bit more, providing some insights around some of the social dimensions of this integration. Let me talk about some of the environmental implications. I'd like to ask Sophie, you mentioned in your response ecosystem-based approaches, nature-based solutions. How do you see this integration, contributing from an environmental perspective? Sophie.
Yeah, thanks for this really good question. I mean, the capture fisheries, and that's this type of fisheries that the guide is focusing on, really depends on a healthy ecosystem. So therefore, when you want to sustain captured fisheries, you thereby need to sustain a healthy ecosystem. And all the mitigation measures or the management measures that you provide in order to sustain fisheries, the wild character of fish, then you also need to make sure that your ecosystem, in terms of the connectivity between the different water bodies, in terms of maintaining sufficient water in the different connected water bodies, is there. And thereby you also ensure some enhanced biodiversity, not only in terms of fish, but also in terms of other aquatic resources like aquatic plants, snails, and etc., that are also a source of food for the more vulnerable people and the poor ones, of course, that Simon mentioned. So, I mean, I've partly answered the question. Do you need me to further elaborate on this?
I think that's good, Sophie. I can see a number of questions coming in around the provide us some examples of concrete technical managerial solutions. So maybe if I could push the panelists to and Sophie, if you have any particular examples, that would be appreciated. If not, I'd ask you to think about that, and then we'll come back later on. We have about 3 minutes left for this panel session. So
I could respond on that, Mike. I was typing an answer to that one.
Thank you. Go
thanks.
ahead.
Yeah, Matthias here was asking about concrete technical or management interventions. I think this will come up maybe in the second panel a bit. But basically, we do have options out there, and a lot of them break down into 2 or 3 major areas. One is in the management of water flow and water levels, as Sophie mentioned, keeping the right volumes and flows, particularly at critical parts of the life cycle. So these are timed releases or maintaining flow during critical periods of migration or breeding. Then there's the infrastructure or the physical elements of restoring connectivity. This can be achieved through redesigning structures, putting into place fish passage, fish-friendly regulators, rock ramps. So there's a wide range of technical solutions to restore connectivity. And maybe the third one is getting into the habitat restoration or reconstruction and constructing wetlands or creating refuges, basically providing the habitat that is essential for life stages of fish within these systems, either beside it, in the drainage areas, in the upper catchments, or within the system itself. And that includes both the command area and the reservoir. There are options there. So there are a lot of things out there, but we don't have a lot of history of this. We're still in the very early stages of trying to get irrigation engineers to buy into this idea that there are gains, there are win-wins here for us to try to capture, and also to get them to agree to finance and fund it, or at least divert money to that. So we have an uphill challenge. It's not all easy. I'll leave it there.
Okay, thanks Simon. And perhaps before closing this panel session, what I'd like to do just to build a little bit on what you've just said. We've talked about the social dimensions, the hidden social values of fisheries. We've talked about some of the environmental benefits. What about the economic benefits? And I wonder, John, if you'd like to just comment on that and provide any examples. What do we know about economic benefits of integration of fish into irrigation schemes? John.
Thanks, Mike. So I think there hasn't been an extensive amount of work, as Simon said, about sort of the integration of fisheries into irrigation, but looking at it from the perspective of maximisation of land and water outputs, there's some really good examples around the world from where integrating fisheries into irrigated landscapes has the potential to bring economic benefits. And some work that's been done recently on fish passage has shown that within wetlands that were originally disconnected through irrigation infrastructure, allowing fish back into those and increasing fisheries production within those wetlands for the communities around that, a return on investment was between around 5 and 7 years. So that's an important aspect to be able to provide that research to show to either donor organisations or the government institutions themselves that by building such things as fish passage or rice fish systems, that you can have economic benefits that don't disrupt the irrigation systems themselves, but actually add benefit to it.
Oh, thank you for that, and it's really good to hear those sort of win-win examples coming through. And perhaps with that, I would just thank our panelists for this first session. We'll be coming back to you with some further questions, I know that, but thank you for this first session. And just take a little break with an audience poll. Over to you, Doina. Back to the audience now. You ready to set off the poll? Okay, a very clear question there. And 4 questions. So let's give a little while to run through the questions. And the hosts and panelists not able to vote. Okay. And we've got 135 participants now. That's great. That's increased from our first poll. That's really nice. Great to see. Really good. Thanks everyone for joining. Doina, how are we doing on the poll? We've got a good participation. Maybe 5 seconds left to provide your answers here. Okay, so overwhelming 95% to do see benefits, and with a small number not. Well, that's interesting. Love to probe that no a little bit more, and perhaps put some questions into the question box, and let's explore that. Why do we not see the benefits? Really love to hear more about that. Fairly, yeah, all of those four dimension, with productivity being the winner there, but all dimensions, all outcomes being seen across the group. And then the big question, do you see key barriers? So many individuals see barriers to integrating fish and aquatic foods into irrigation systems. So let's explore those a bit more. Let's make use of the panel to probe them on some of those key barriers and how we address that. And then within that, lack of political will, lack of capacity, lack of awareness coming very high. Costs not so high. That's interesting. Okay, so some thoughts for the panelists, and I just encourage you to just reflect on those poll results, and we'll come back to you and get your thoughts and suggestions on how one addresses these barriers, why the case has not been made for integration. Anyway, thank you very much all for participating in that. And we're getting some questions. That's really, really good. So appreciate that input. Let's move on. Panel 2 now. Many of you see the benefits, and we've talked about some social, economic, environmental benefits. The question is how to scale it. How can these benefits be implemented at scale? And then we also have our own question around how can the guide help investors, policymakers, scale this integration. So let me first ask, I think I have Simon again. Can you give us some examples of where this integration has worked at scale? And then Alvin after that. Simon, back to you again, please.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, there are increasing examples, the numbers of examples of where water management has attempted to reverse impacts on fisheries. And the largest and most obvious of these are where there have been dams on large rivers, and these have had major impacts on fisheries. But those dams are not always irrigation. They may be multi-purpose dams or even hydropower, so unrelated. And of course, the early examples of this were fish passages on salmon rivers. And of course, those rivers were not irrigation rivers, or they were not irrigation dams. Maybe we just roll back a wee bit and recognize that within Asia, at least, there is a very, very long traditional history of integrating fish with irrigation. This is more like the traditional upland irrigation systems that we can see in northern Vietnam, northern Laos, northern Thailand, southern China, Yunnan, over into northern Vietnam. And these were very elegant valley irrigation, terraced irrigation systems, and they were designed specifically to encourage and enable the integration of fish culture and wild fish services within that. In terms of proactive integration into modern irrigation systems, this is much more challenging. But there are still examples. Again, the biggest win for this is typically in large floodplain systems where there are existing large inland fisheries and people who are dependent and engaged in inland fisheries in large numbers, because this is where the win happens. This is where you will get impact. And in this case, we have seen irrigation working with stakeholders, working with fishers or farmers to open regulators, timed regulation of water to allow seasonal movements of spawning animals, migrating animals, but also downstream movements of larvae and fry. The opening and closing of polder systems in Bangladesh is a good example of that. We've seen the timed openings of large regulators on irrigation systems and rivers in Thailand, in the Nam Kam River, and the Pak Mun Dam is another example of that in Thailand. Also, and we haven't really got a lot of concrete examples, literally concrete examples of these physical structures, which are fish ramps or fish ways that are being constructed. These are just emerging in Asia. They're very exploratory. They're very clever, innovative designs. There is a very dynamic group from Australia that's working with Southeast Asia to try and promote these. And these are designed to enable a maximum number of species from the multitude of species in the floodplain to move upstream and get into disconnected wetlands and disconnected water bodies. And we've seen some very encouraging results with hundreds of species, 115 species able to move up one of these fish ramps or fish ladders that have been constructed. There is also finally the other dimension of this, which is active interventions to mitigate those impacts on wild species. And there we move into the world of aquaculture or of stocking and enhancement. And this is also another strategy, which is probably the most popular at the moment. Unfortunately, it's rarely evaluated objectively, and we don't really get a very true picture of how successful that actually is. And again, this tends to distort our understanding of whether or not it's the best way to go. And so I would always hammer home, every time we try a new type of intervention, please, please, please look at it, evaluate it, assess it, get the economics of it working, and also the benefits of impact, because that's what we're missing out there, and we really need that information. Thanks, sir.
Thanks, Simon. I'd love to get the country perspective. Maybe if I could just, Alvin, shift the schedule a little bit, and perhaps take this opportunity to ask His Excellency Chan about the experience in Cambodia, and why is this subject important to Cambodia, and what is the strategy of Cambodia on addressing, and practical experience of addressing some of the issues that we're talking about? Your Excellency, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Over to you.
Thank you, Miles. And thank you for the opportunity to share once among the panelists. As you may know, Cambodia has 3,000 irrigation system. And this 3,000 irrigation system was constructed during a long time periods ago, where the approach of focusing construction infrastructures of the irrigation. But today it's not like that. We apply the holistics and the integrations approach, irrigation and water resources management. Especially recently, our government very clear in the water sector within the long-term roadmap of the long-term investment program, start from 2019 to 2033. And we work very close with ADBs, the Asian Development Bank. We strategize clearly with them and with other banks such as World Bank, the European Investment Bank. We told them whole of system, irrigation and water resources management, focus on the basin-wide, sub-basin-wide, down to the grassroots of this irrigation system. In order to make our irrigation system do not think only infrastructure of irrigation. Big investment coming only the for the infrastructures only. But we think to make our irrigation system to be friendly to fish. As our colleague speaker above related to those experience built up within the irrigation system facilities such as fishway, fish pairs. Our personnel, including engineer, technical person, scientists, design the irrigation system, including all kind facilities for farming fish, raising fish at the downstream and upstream, thinks about a good environment for fish, So until today, we have the irrigated area, 1.7 million hectare, and the rice cultivation areas 2.5 million hectare, apart from a total agricultural areas 4 million hectare. So further, we have to put more investment to rehabilitate, to improve and modernize our irrigation system to be friendly with fish, with farming of fish and others aquatics anymore. So I would stop here, and then I will hear more questions if you have. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Your Excellency, and that whole of system approach that you emphasize there is so wonderful to hear, and that this integration is really about thinking more of the system rather than the individual components. So that's a great example from Cambodia. And you made the connection to the Asian Development Bank, and I think with that, I'd like to ask Alvin Lopez. Firstly, how do you see these guidelines being put to best use, and what do we need to do to have a wider scale adoption of this integrated, indeed this whole of system approach that was talked about by His Excellency? Alvin.
Thanks, Mike. Greetings to all. Yeah, I think Excellency already gave a bit of a flavor of what sort of the approach Cambodia is sort of beginning to take as well. And yeah, how to sort of look at wider scale adoption of these guidelines. Yeah, we already heard so much about the benefits of integrating fisheries into sort of irrigation systems. I mean, especially now, I mean, it's not been mentioned, but the current pandemic, COVID-19, I mean, it serves as really a stark reminder on how vulnerable we all become, yeah, when we really push the natural ecosystems to the tipping point, and the ecological processes that we depend on are really stressed beyond. So how to ensure adoption of these guidelines? I mean, allow me to sort of frame the responses in several key questions, really. I mean, firstly, already mentioned, but is the enabling environment in place and the policy environment as well for proper all-encompassing irrigation development? We heard that Cambodia is moving towards that direction. Or is there a need for reform to consider wider ecological processes, including things like was mentioned, water allocation guidelines and environmental flows as such? I mean, secondly, the issue of intersectoral coordination as well. It is not just a fisheries, and often, I mean, it's much beyond that as well, especially from a sovereign perspective. Are all the sectors on board? All the relevant ministries and departments responsible for be it fisheries, water resources, agriculture, environment, energy. I mean, they're all a part of the broader systems, I mean, the inland water systems. And unfortunately, the matter of fact is even in reality at times when we think of it, there's even a challenge and a disconnect between irrigation and agriculture at times. And even something as basic as that is sometimes quite challenging because of intersectoral issues. So this is really a governance issue, an intersectoral issue, which needs to be resolved as a sort of another key point before we can look at wider scale adoption as well of these guidelines. Thirdly, it was mentioned also about the value the value of a successful pilot is really priceless. So can we use this guide to initiate a few pilot schemes at various scales? I mean, to sort of actually demonstrate the benefits, really. I mean, Simon mentioned earlier about some Thailand, Bangladesh, and there are some examples that we can capture. Has this been captured and sort of widely disseminated? Is there more an effective way of disseminating these targeted stakeholders in order to push this agenda forward? Fourthly, we must not forget, I mean, coming from from ADB, we should really forget the role of multilateral and bilateral development agencies here. Is there a coordinated and coherent approach from the multilateral players or bilateral assistance in that regard when it comes to mainstreaming fisheries and irrigation development? Can this guide become a key reference when planning future investments? In Cambodia, for example, we have an established working groups for agriculture and water. There's a platform for donors to coordinate on key principles and priorities. So can the development partners adopt and promote common principles? I mean, especially the big players. And from an ADB perspective, we are really increasingly pursuing nature-based solutions and to infrastructure development. And it's also facilitating a more integrated approach to water resource management. And in fact, we've just completed a pilot on fish-friendly irrigation scheme in Laos, and I mean through the installation of fish passes and all. Fifth is just two more points here, is capacity. Is there sufficient capacity and expertise within the country, really? And to support development of such schemes, if you want to facilitate adoption of the guidelines. Right from the initial conceptualization to feasibility assessments based on this guide. If not, do we have an international network to tap on? Is that readily available? Or is there a plan to build national capacity? And many irrigation investment projects often include actually capacity building training components within the project, but have we sufficiently explored inclusion of fish-friendly irrigation schemes into that? Have agencies, especially the partners around here at this forum, are the agencies responsible for development of this guide? Have they rolled out a training program to support its implementation? And it's a question to partners here. Another point is retrofitting versus new development. I think the guide also highlights this. Should the priority be to retrofit existing schemes or new schemes? The publication talks about this a bit. And is there sufficient evidence in the broader ecosystem context? I think that infrastructure has impeded key ecological processes, which resulted in a massive decline. Which brings me to the final point in this sort of question is really the prioritization in the broader landscape. When resources are scarce, prioritization is key, really. I mean, example, the Tonle Sap in Cambodia. I mean, its floodplains, for example, is really part of the larger Mekong River system. I mean, home to one of the most productive fisheries in the world and aquatic biodiversity as well. But so what exactly is the impact of irrigation development on fisheries and the floodplain and associated subbasins? Where are the most critical priority locations for interventions? Do we already have this information? I think I gather from what Simon mentioned, there's a lot of gaps as well. If not, how can we work together to obtain this? And can we use this as a guide to provide some guidance, I mean, on how we go about it? I think that's more or less the key, some of the points I had to, more questions than answers, Mike, but just to respond to your question.
Yeah, thank you. And you responded to the questions with more questions, but that's excellent. Some excellent ideas there. Just to come back to you a little bit, what do you, if you were to prioritize, what would that be? What would be your recommendations then to, okay, we have a group coming together here to wanting to work with national partners, wanting to work with ADB and investment banks. What would you see as the priorities for action here, or a priority for action?
So there are, I think the starting point is I refer to the question which I had mentioned earlier as well. I mean, the guide talks about new development schemes and retrofitting as well, old schemes. And do we have enough information? I mean, basically the economics was, again, over there earlier, there was this question about economics. Have we demonstrated the economics and of this sufficiently? Is there really information on what, from an understanding of the system as a whole for large river systems, for example, or floodplains and basins, where are the locations which are actually existing infrastructure are critically impeding ecological processes, be it fish migration or other, and fisheries as a whole? So I think the key players needs to come together to have this sort of an assessment available, really, and then sort of inform sort of investment, because it's very, very difficult. Often in investment projects, a key component really, especially for bilateral or multilateral, a key component is economic analysis. And economic analysis is really a key component of design of investment projects. And this is often, does it sufficiently capture questions like this? And is it prioritized in the economic investments analysis, sorry. So I think there is opportunity for the players to come together. It's a question of, as I said, more questions than answers.
Yeah, thank you, Alvin. And I'm going to keep some of those questions to come back to the other other panelists in the final session. So, but thank you, Alvin. Thank you, Your Excellency. Thanks also, Simon, for the feedback in that second panel. Before we come to a more open Q&A session, let's just take another short break with an audience poll. Perhaps over to you, Doina, to run the next poll. So, do you think the guidelines are useful in your work, and in which particular area? Thank you. Spend a few seconds to respond to that. Okay, Doina, how are we doing? Good. Okay, so we have 133 participants, so 64 responding. Obviously the panelists and moderators not there, so about 60% plus response. So great. Okay, good support in terms of the usefulness, and across the 4 dimensions, planning and design. Well, that's really heartening to see that they can be used in, or there's that view that they can be used in this planning and design phase, which is obviously critical, as well as research, policy, on-site operations. Okay, that really helpful insights, and very useful for, I think, the team looking at enabling these guidelines, you know, and facilitating their use as we move forward. So, okay, thank you for the poll. Now we're going to open into a more general the questions. We're going to go back to some of the questions and then field these 2 panel members. Okay, Simon, I'm going to ask you there, and let's capacity. Alvin posed the question around capacity. Simon, what are your views about the capacity building here? Simon.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, I've been looking at the Q&As actually coming in, and there's some really nice comments and some observations, particularly around the idea that you know, irrigation is still irrigation engineers are trained as engineers, and that there probably is not a big part of their curriculum that focuses on social and environmental safeguarding, although I'm sure that's coming in. But old school engineers are probably less familiar or less willing to engage with that and see this kind of thing as an obstacle to be worked around. And so this brings us back to, and there was suggestions saying, well, we need to update curricula for training irrigation engineers. I'm sure there is scope for on-the-job awareness raising and sensitization. In fact, possibly one of the most successful examples of this has been, you know, for example, these little projects that were done in Laos with ACR, and but also the Cambodian fish refuge activities, where irrigation staff were put together with fisheries staff and went to the field to see these things in action. And they kind of speak for themselves, the feedback from stakeholders, from local fishers and irrigation farmers. really wins the day. It wins hearts and minds. But we do need working examples, really, you know, successful pilots, getting this stuff mainstream, getting the economic argument sorted out, as Alvin was mentioning. But all of this sort of shackled to or coupled to a very practical, you know, I want to see it before I can believe it. You can talk at people as much as you like, but when they see it, the lights come on. And I think this is something we really need to do.
Thanks, Simon. Yeah, so the perhaps there are some questions here about disseminating the guidelines in other languages. That's extremely I think useful suggestion. Improving governance, institutional mandates, how to work in a practical way with this governance and institutional you know, challenge of working across different institutions. Maybe Sophie, you started to touch on this in the earlier panel. Would you like to give do you have some practical examples there that could address that that particular question of getting the governance institutional mechanisms working working well in this more systems approach? Sophie.
Well, in terms of practical examples, I don't have many recent ones, but overall, I mean, the idea would be, indeed, as already mentioned, to support a better coordination between all related sectors. I mean, as Alvin mentioned, I mean, it's a wide range. I mean, from water irrigation, even energy, agriculture, fisheries, etc., and the environment. So this requires strengthening capacity of the institutional officers as well, and this requires some time for them to better understand the benefits of more coherent governance irrigation system. And this is usually one of the major barriers in terms of the time it requires for really, I mean, these officers to be engaged and involved throughout the process of understanding the connections, working together, seeing the different problems between the different activities, and designing a better institutional mechanism and governance mechanism so that we have a real integration.
Okay, thanks, Sophie. Quite a lot of work to do still there. Let me just go to some of the other questions here. I see we have one from Nigeria. Fantastic. So I'm going to pick that out from Ezi Odiri, watching from Nigeria. We're currently in the process of incorporating large-scale aquaculture facilities at Gurara Dam in Nigeria. What do the panel think about incorporating large-scale aquaculture value chain components at dams? This may create jobs and add nutritional value. Who could take that? John, would you like to have a go at that one? And thank you, Ezi, for that contribution from Nigeria. Really great to have you with us today. John?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think, again, Mike, it comes down to that maximising the potential of what you have. So now you have a built environment such as a reservoir or a dam that has water, and to maximise the outcomes from that, you can use such things as caged aquaculture, and that is being done. It is being done. I mean, it is done in the sea very much, but it's there is a possibility to do that within reservoirs. But also, there's some barriers to that depending on the countries you're working within, that not all reservoirs are seen as fishable areas. So there's cases of that in Myanmar where fishermen are not allowed to, or are not supposed to fish within those areas. So there's enabling and disabling policy and legislation that also goes into that. But I think from a practical point of view, aside from all the technical challenges that come with that it makes sense to try and maximise the potential of the built environment that you now have.
Yep, thank you. And as you would welcome. There more ideas, more questions. We're happy to field them as a follow-up from the webinar today. Very much interested to keep the conversation flowing. There's a question here regarding the from Sanjeev De Silva. Fish passages and other tech solutions can provide the reconnection into natural systems, but there still remains a major gap between this and ensuring fish stocks generate pro-pore, pro-nutrition benefits because of unequal social landscapes that mediate benefit flows. So should the conversation around irrigation be expanded beyond, well, I think it is, but further beyond physical to this social continuum when designing and financing future interventions? Who would like that one? I don't know. Alvin, would you like to respond to that question?
So Mike, let me rephrase that question again and correct me if I'm wrong. It was about basically, should the conversation on irrigation try to focus more on what? Social benefits and livelihoods? Kind of a dimension?
Yeah, yes, that's right. And how to ensure pro-pore, pro-nutrition, dimensions are coming more to the fore beyond the sort of technical, management type interventions.
Yeah, I think this question clearly links to especially organizations like us with sort of development focus. Not just technical or infrastructure. The development impact is a key factor when you're doing the analysis as well, and to basically what the socioeconomic situation of target communities are, and it definitely needs to demonstrate a proper focus. So the economic analysis as well needs to demonstrate proper focus. So I think to answer that question, it's already part of the equation. So it's just a matter of bringing in fish-friendly irrigations as an option in the analysis of the design, and whether that the economics behind that and the contribution to sort of poverty reduction and things like that is actually captured or not. So I think that's the question I raised earlier as well. Have we sufficiently captured this? Really, I hope I answered that question.
All right, thank you.
Mike, can I add to that?
Yeah, please do, John.
So leading on from what Alvin is saying, I think if you look at instruments such as the Sustainable Development Goals, food security has moved on from a hunger-based focus where calories were the basis of much of what was done, and irrigation was exceptionally good at being able to fill that, and it has broadened into the sense of nutrition and also well-being, and then you get that combination of fish and rice are able to provide that hunger, nutrition and well-being components of that. And if you're concentrating on marginalised groups, and most development agendas are trying to bring the poorest out of being poor, and provide them with opportunities, whether they, well-being and life opportunities, it's important to understand how the technical interventions, when you're designing them, will influence who your beneficiary is. And I use an example with fish passage is that if I'm looking to benefit marginalised groups such as the landless, then I would look to prioritise fish passage into areas such as wetlands or floodplains that are a common pool resource where everyone has some access to them. And if I was trying to improve the economic status of, say, fishers in some way within that irrigated landscape, I might concentrate on areas where leasable fisheries are. So inclusiveness or what's called inclusivity, I think it's a really important component to add right at the start of any technical-based program, and so that the beneficiaries within that are very well understood, and those needs and where the technical components can then fit in are suited to meeting those development needs.
Yeah, thanks,
Mike.
John. And
thanks,
that's thank you for those insights and those different perspectives, different contexts, both social, environmental, and likely economic as well. Might feed into some of the earlier, thinking about drawing together different pilots to inform, practical examples. So thank you for that. Time for really one, possibly two questions here. There's a question around how many engineers are in the participants. Now we don't know, we can't tell at this time, but there's a clear message there about involving water engineers in raising awareness of the guidelines, the sort of principles and practices that have been talked about in the guidelines. Perhaps Sophie, can I ask you, how does one do that? What are the sort of practical, engineer-oriented, awareness raising incentives that could be explored here, perhaps as a follow-up? Sophie, any thoughts appreciated?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. As I mentioned during the first panel, the challenge of producing this guide was to address these complex realities of integration, meaning in terms of social, economic, and environmental terms, into some practical and operational guide, a document that can support water and irrigation professionals so that they can go through a step-by-step process. And that's why actually it's a stepwise process, because the reality is so complex, as we have discussed, that the guidance should really, support these professionals in terms of first understanding the system, then identifying the major issues, prioritizing them, and then finding jointly with the key actors some appropriate options and measures. And that's not only this, it's also about committing to implementation, because very often the process tends to stop at identifying some options and measures, and implementation is lagging behind or is weaker than meant to be. So, I hope that this collaborative work between the three main institutions will help these professionals in irrigation and water, especially, to go about it along the way, and then also improve through practice and experience. Because this guide is not an end in itself. It's a working document that is hopefully meant to improve along the way and through the various experience across the world.
All right, thanks, Sophie. And with that, We're running very tight for time now, so thank you to all the questions. There's still some great questions still there that we've not addressed. There were some around differences between Africa and Asia, and I'd love to spend a bit more time, but we're quite tight for time. So I'd really like to thank everyone, and now pass over to Matthew, who gets the job of summarizing the panel discussion in 4 minutes. Over to you, Matthew. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Mike. First of all, I'd just like to say thank you very much to all the panelists and to all the participants in this webinar. I think it's been an extremely rich discussion, and it's highlighted a lot of very relevant points that we need to take on board. I think what we've shown, or what we hope to, we demonstrated, certainly through the guidelines, is that there are potentially big social, environmental and economic benefits through integrating fisheries within irrigation schemes. As people highlighted in this, it's also needing to think not beyond just the command area, but to think about that extended command area, both upstream and downstream. There's a great deal of issues and complexities to the problem of integration. It certainly isn't a silver bullet. There are many challenges. Key, of course, is this need to bring together both the technical components, but also the issues around governance institutions to ensure that such interventions are really development pro-poor, and bringing about real improvements in people's well-being. I think people have emphasised a lot. It's a systems approach. I thought His Excellency brought that out really well in talking about Cambodia. The fact that you need to think about it as a whole system, that it needs this intersectoral integration, and that is one of the major challenges, is how to bring the different sectors on board. As Sophie just alluded to, I mean, the objective of these guidelines is they're targeted at, or supposedly targeted at, irrigation engineers and engineers, water resource planners, etc. But as has been noted, it's interesting to see how many of those sorts of people are actually involved in this discussion today. And I think one of our key challenges is actually moving these guidelines out beyond the fisheries sector, to try and bring those people on board. And I also like the idea that we need some successful pilots to demonstrate where this can really work, and where it can really bring about improvements, where in the landscape and where we need to target it. And I think that's something that's been started in places. There is some work on targeting this type of intervention, but there's a lot more to be done there. And also, one other point that I saw, one question that I saw raised was, what about climate change? It's not something we've mentioned within this, hasn't been discussed, but I think it is a very important issue, and we need to think about how to ensure that, integrating fisheries within irrigation systems does actually lead to more resilience and to more resilient systems. And I think there is a little bit of research that shows that is actually the case. But it's a very good question, and I think there needs to be research around that as well. So I think that summarizes very crudely, of course, because it was a very rich discussion, and I've just picked out a few points, and there was a lot more which we can go away and look at and think about, and we will do so. So thanks very much. And in terms of next steps, our plan is over the next year to try and increase awareness of this issue, to try and promote the guidelines at various different scales. So from international, regional and national, we will do a sort of an awareness raising campaign. We want to do work in Cambodia and Myanmar specifically at that national level to try and integrate, or to get these guidelines being used at the national level. And of course, I think somebody mentioned translation into other languages. That would be very important. So we may look at trying to translate them into other languages. But I think it may be they'll need to be tailored slightly to the specific context of the countries that we want to work in. And also targeting, as somebody mentioned, development partners thinking about multilateral and bilateral donors and how we can get them to take on board some of these messages. We heard a lot from the ADB, and it's very encouraging to hear that they're now talking about fish-friendly irrigation, and they've actually started to invest in it in a country like Laos. But it'd be great if that could be extended to others. So that's our plan over the next year, is to try and do this awareness raising and to get the guidelines widely disseminated and hopefully taken up in a really practical way. So move them off the shelf and actually into real utilisation. So with that, I'd just like to say again, thank you very much. I appreciate very much. I think it was an excellent discussion, and you know, I learned a lot, and I hope you did as well. So thank you very much indeed. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Matthew, and appreciate the summary in a very short period of time. And I can see there are more requests and questions. It's absolutely brilliant to see that enthusiasm and interest. So I really encourage you to stay in touch with the research team here. There was an email at the beginning, and I'm sure you'll find it very easy to stay in touch, get the contact details as needed. Really like to see the dialogue continue. Particularly interested in connecting the research to the policy, the investments. Really want to see some of the very nice work done in the guidelines put into practice and have an impact at the scale I think many of us here believe we can have an impact at. So really encourage the partnerships. Let's continue to keep the dialogue and networking going around this key area. Let me close the session. I think, Doina, that you've got a slide also to close the session, but let me close by thanking the panel members, His Excellency, Alvin, John, Simon, Sophie. Thanks so much for engaging in the panel discussions. Really appreciate the time and insights provided. We hope that you've all been inspired and taken something useful from this Fish and Water for Thought, and that you can apply in various ways, your everyday work, research, other actions that you're able to take to shape the world, and take many of the ideas here, put into practice in ways that make a difference to people that we're all working towards. So thanks again. Wishing you all a wonderful day where you are. Please stay safe and healthy. This event is now adjourned. Thanks very much, and everyone for the participation. Appreciate it, and look forward to staying in touch in this fascinating area of work. So thank you, and bye for now.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.